Just a quick show of hands. How many of you guys are front-end engineers? Anyone front-end? Okay. What about mobile engineers? Back-end engineers? Okay, so we've got back-end engineers. Well, what if you wanted to make a mobile app or a front-end? Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about React Native, which is this really cool new technology from Facebook. It's open source. And if you've ever even attempted to make a mobile app, you'll know that it's really difficult and really time-consuming. And so React Native from Facebook aims to solve some of that. And the general solution is by letting you write JavaScript, which then executes native Objective-C and native Java API calls. So that's sort of React Native in a nutshell. And I'm going to show you a little bit of what you can do with React Native, what makes it so cool, and some of the tools that you can use to make that happen. So my name's Devin Abbott, and I create a company called Deco Software, and we make tools around React Native. So I'm going to show you a little bit about some of the cool developer tool stuff we're doing and what it looks like when you build an app. So we make an IDE, and an IDE enables developers to build higher quality apps faster. And we do this by essentially taking all these times when you're sort of running in circles. Think about like setting up your environment in React Native. There's a lot of that. Boilerplate for components, for actions, for network calls, for all this stuff. Trying to implement a common UX pattern, like, I don't know, a nav bar or a contacts list, whatever, that definitely already exists in thousands of apps in the App Store, but yet somehow you have to write it custom because the open source one just doesn't quite fit in your app right. So we're trying to take all these rough spots and smooth out the development process, make it really fast and easy. And so there are three big ideas that we focus on in our tools. The first one is components. This idea that components, these reusable bundles of code, should be fully supported by your tools. They should be easy to create, easy to search, easy to update, and easy to share. The second thing that we want to do is help you scaffold your app. What we mean by that is a lot of stuff right now you write from scratch. You start with a blank canvas and you build up from there. What if you could what if you could get to 80% of your app in a single day and then just iterate on the custom parts, the parts that make your app special? And the last thing is previewing. It's notoriously painful to build for iOS and Android. It can take minutes before you see a change. And React Native, along with better developer tools, can let you send a preview to your phone instantly. And when you change code, it updates immediately. So the first thing I want to talk about is components. Components, we often think of in terms of coding or like engineering components, classes, etc. But I mean more like UX components, like grids, lists, video players, photo galleries, contacts lists. And when you build UI, you often re-implement these things, which you see in thousands of apps. And what we really want to do is say, if I want a grid of videos, I should be able to take an off-the-shelf grid, put in a video component, and that should be it. I shouldn't have to write any custom code for that. Or if I want, say, a hamburger menu that opens up to a contacts list, like in Facebook or something. These are just common UX patterns, so I shouldn't have to write any code for that either. Now, of course, these off-the-shelf components won't work for everything. I'll still want to be able to sort of zoom in on one, customize it, configure it, fork it, and make it look like my designs, or give it my correct data set. And then I pop it back into my app. The idea still being that I write very little custom code, and it's more configuration and tweaking. Then I can say, I want to identify the important parts of my component and share it with others. Maybe I made like the material design, like for Android, the material design contacts list, and I want to share that with another team or with the world. My tooling should help me sort of do that, identify the important parts, and make it so that if someone searches for, say, a contacts list, they see my component as one of a bunch of jumping off points. The second thing we want to help you do, oh, I forgot my GIF. It shouldn't be like this, where when you want to insert a component, you basically have to rip open your entire app and just copy and paste the whole thing and start changing stuff. It should just work. So next thing is scaffolding. Let me paint a picture in your mind. Let's say I'm building an iOS app today. I'm building a new app. It is a messaging app, and it has a really cool feature. I can send pixel art to my friends, and they can send pixel art back to me, and it's going to be amazing. Everyone's going to love it. And so the way the development process might work for me right now is week 0, I start blank, empty canvas, nothing. And the first thing I'll probably do, take the first week to sort of stub out my data, my core classes, and my basic layout. I normally start with colors like CSS, red, green, and blue. If you've written CSS, you'll know how easy it is to make something ugly by using the defaults. So we're not at a point where we could show this to anyone, of course. Week 2, I'd probably do the detailed UI work. Week 3, I'd make it actually look nice. So at this point, I can start showing it to people. And there's like the core messaging app I'm trying to build. And then week 4, I get to do the really cool feature, which is like this pixel art sharing and creation and all that. And so this is pretty reasonable average development cycle for something like this. But I see 2 problems with it. The first one is it took me 75% of my time to build just the common messaging app features, which I really wasn't trying to innovate on at all. And I only spent, say, 25% of my time building the cool pixel art sharing, which is the whole reason why my app exists. So that seems sort of backwards to me. And then the second thing is it took me a whole month to do this. And that's bad for the main reason that for something like this, you need to be testing with real users in real situations, because we often find that our users use our apps differently than we imagined. And their way of using our apps might be better, it might be more efficient, but we need to get in their hands to know that. So okay, let's rewind this app I'm building back to week 0. Wouldn't it be great if even on the first day I could have sort of a scaffolded version? What I mean by that is I can just pop in the core messaging app that I need, that I'm not trying to innovate on at all, and I can tweak it from there so that, okay, maybe it doesn't use my data, but maybe it uses Firebase or something, and maybe it doesn't quite match my designs, but I can always iterate on that later. The important thing is I get to focus then the rest of the week on my really cool custom feature, and that lets me get this thing in the hands of users much, much faster. And so the last thing I'm going to do is a little demo, and this is sort of on the topic of previewing about seeing your changes in real time. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to build the main screen for the Uber app in 5 minutes. This is fun. So I have a screenshot of Uber right here so you can see what we're building. And then mine will look like this. It'll be called Uber. And I'm going to do this in the developer tool I write called Deco IDE. It's an IDE for React Native. It's packaged in Electron, which is a desktop packagement system for running a website as a desktop app, which is awesome. It's written in React. And over here on the left, I have the files in my project. In the center, I have some boilerplate for this Uber app, pretty standard stuff. And on the right, I have the property inspector. And this is sort of a demo version of our product that it will illustrate some really cool stuff you can do with React Native. I'm going to show you the app in the iOS simulator over here. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually not going to write any code at all. I'm going to insert an open source component. And I'm going to do this with a built-in feature that lets me search through an open source collection of these things. So I'm going to say Command I to insert, and I want a map. So I'm going to search for a map and hit enter, and now I have a map. And next, I want a location pin. So you'll see location pin appears. And on the right, I have the properties of these components that I'm searching and inserting. So I can say, I want my location pin to say set location, and I want it to be black. And it's looking a little more like Uber already. Next, I'm going to write just one thing. I'm going to write a view. And now I'm going to insert a location search box. I'm going to add a title bar above that. And below both of these, I'm going to add a toggle button. And then I'm just going to tweak a couple of these so it looks a little more like Uber. Can't remember the exact color at the moment. Show this label, change the title to Uber. And I'll change my toggle button, which is a little bit off screen, but add some border, add border radius, and add padding. So, okay, it's looking like Uber, but it doesn't really have any functionality yet. So I'm just going to add one little bit of functionality, which is I'm going to hook up the map to the search box. So when I move around the map, then the search, the location will change. So here you can see this sort of scaffolding for this map has a callback ready for me. So I can say I want to add the latitude and longitude of the map into this component state. And now this is going to throw an error for just a sec because it's updating in real time. But when I'm done, I'm now feeding the latitude and longitude into the search box. So I have a little bit of functionality already, which is pretty cool because I just built basically the entire launch screen of the Uber app in like 5 minutes. Didn't have to write any code myself, just reuse these existing things. So I'm going to show you guys one more fun demo. One more fun demo where not as fun as that. It's called Floaty Plane, and it might look familiar to a game you've played called Flappy Bird. I did not write this code. I borrowed it from a friend who writes another React Native developer tool called Exponent. It's super cool. I butchered his code, shoved it in Deco IDE, and now you have Floaty Plane. So I'll just play through so you can get the idea. I'm this little plane. As I click, I fly around, and if I run into something, I lose. So if you've ever written a game before, you know how tedious and difficult it is to tweak your game to make it feel just right. So one of the things that React Native is great for is this real-time manipulation of your app. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on leap mode, which makes it so that I can't lose. So you'll see I can pretty much just fly through anything now, which is awesome. But let's say I want to start adjusting things like the amplitude of the plane. I just tweak that, and suddenly it starts flying higher and lower. Or I can adjust the frequency of the plane, and now it'll start going much faster. I can adjust things like the speed of the game. I can slow it down to find just the right speed. If I get to 0, of course, it stops entirely. Or I can speed it up, and now it's way too fast. I can do other cool things. Let me get it looking somewhat normal again. I can do other cool things like adjust the gap between the pipes, make them really wide so that it's easier to play. I could go over to the plane itself here and say, I actually want it to be bigger, maybe 3 times bigger or 4 times bigger. I could say I don't want it to rotate as much. I could say I want to show the hitbox so I can see where it's colliding with things. Or maybe I want to adjust the pipes themselves. I don't want them as wide. Maybe I want to make them really thin. So objectively, this is probably a much worse game. It doesn't make any sense. But the idea is you can tweak in real time your game and get it feeling just right. And that's it. So yeah, clap.
So this project is on the right side of the IT, based on the components of the source code?
Yeah, so in this demo version, it's pretty primitive where they're sort of specified manually. But what we want to do is basically use static analysis of your code and also let the user add some additional sort of intelligence on top, like if a library author wants to customize it. So we infer most of the properties, but also give you a final review.
Where do you get those duplicates? Is it something that you provided as a part of IT, or you need to build all these components and load them into IT to do that?
So in this demo version, they're all just sort of loaded in. What we want to do is a couple things. First, we want to have like a global repository of these. And most of them will just come from NPM because they're just regular React Native components. But you might want to add like additional smarts that our IDE can pick up on top of that. We want to make it super easy for you to publish directly. So the idea being that as you're working in the IDE, you can really easily add to this library that everyone can use. And then the last thing is, a lot of companies have their own component collection, their own design guide. So we want to make it super easy to load in custom sets. So they come from pretty much everywhere. We've launched. It doesn't look quite like my demo, but if you go to our website, Deco Software, you can download our IDE and try it out. It's Mac only right now, but it's built on Electron, so it shouldn't be too much effort to port. We just have a lot of other stuff to do first. Yep.
Can you modify the code and see the results, or is it only the properties panel?
You can modify the code, like when I set the latitude and longitude, and that updated right away. Yep. How do we make money?
We're still
figuring it out. But we think that definitely like a developer tool like this, you really can't charge for if you want to gain the kind of adoption you need for it to be really valuable to people. And so right now what we do is companies hire us to customize our tool and to integrate it into their workflow for them. So we just recently did I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about this, so I'm just not going to. But that's the idea. Yep.
Are there any other tools like this?
I guess in a very broad sense, there are a lot of tools. So if you don't want to use React Native in particular, like Xcode with Interface Builder does some really cool stuff that's sort of similar. It's not quite as real-time or exciting, but it's also very cool. And then if you want to use React Native, there's another tool called Exponent, which is more for specifically previewing. It doesn't do necessarily the real-time code manipulation stuff, but React Native has some of that built in. And then depending on platform and framework, there's a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, because I saw a talk, or I watched it on YouTube maybe a couple years ago. I don't know if it was just more of a conceptual talk, because I don't remember there being a product. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but there was a designer guy talking about this concept, but I don't think there was any product.
There's this guy, Brett Victor, who does a lot of these talks, which are very, very cool and very conceptual. And so it might have been him. And we draw a lot of our inspiration from him. So that's where we want to go. Great. Thanks a lot, guys.